The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional therapy or mental health services. If you are experiencing emotional distress or need support, please consult a licensed mental health professional.
Episode 5 of Trauma Unpacked, an introduction to TRE.
Welcome, everyone, to Conversations on the Couch, Safe and Sound. My name is Deborah Olusola, clinical psychologist at the couch, and today we have the extraordinary Ryan Cooper, who's also a clinical psychologist with 20 years of experience. Ryan, welcome.
Thank you.
It's good to see you.
Thank you, Deborah, and you.
Thank you. And thank you for making this time. I know it's not easy with your busy schedule, but we
Likewise.
really appreciate you being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We've been talking about trauma. We are currently, doing a trauma series on this podcast, and we're just trying to get our viewers and listeners to try and understand what trauma is all about. And you're going to bring an interesting dynamic to this conversation. Today we're going to be talking about TRE. I believe it's a specialty that you've embarked on. Obviously, you can educate me as well because I'm also learning about it from you. And I'm sure our, viewers and listeners would also like to know a bit more about it.
Lovely.
But can you tell us what does TRE stand for? What does it mean?
So TRE is tension and trauma release exercises. And it's exercises that we use to assist people with trauma, with stress, with tension, to regulate the nervous system and return to a calm state of being, essentially.
Okay, interesting. Trauma release?
Tension and trauma release exercise.
Okay, that's very interesting. And I guess in terms of now dealing and working with trauma and in your experience, how have you seen it help your clients, your patients? How has it been effective for them?
So I think if we look at what TRE is, the idea behind it and why I think it's so helpful, it is a somatic experience. So it's body-based, which I found very helpful for clients who are very anxious to talk, but there is trauma, there is something going on. This is another fantastic option for people. That is also can be self-administered. You can do it at home when you know what you're doing. And I think the idea then is that people can still find deep release of stored trauma, stress, tension, whether they are traumas that have occurred any time in our life versus daily stresses and strains. It's fantastic for all of it. So I think in how it helps clients is with the TRE, it really targets releasing in the deeper muscles and helping through a shaking or vibrating sensation that is actually part of the body's natural mechanism for healing. We're kind of shaking it off, literally, and it helps to relax those deeper muscle groups that TRE focuses on. The way we store trauma and stress is often stored in certain muscle groups. It's a bit of a response when people are traumatized to kind of suck in and kind of hold. And TRE has targeted those particular muscle groups to actually help them shake it out, relax, let go. And what we're seeing is kind of a return to the safety nervous system. Yeah. So instead of being in our activated fight-flight brain, TRE assists the regulation back into our safe state, where we're ready to connect with others, where we feel comfortable, where we feel safe, where we feel regulated, calmer. So that's how it's helping. Yes. In practice, as you work with people, it's really beautiful to watch in that very often people are working through something, but in a way where they feel completely in control and comfortable. And usually straight after a session, they feel really good or relaxed or ready to go and have a lovely sleep, or in some cases, really energized and ready to face the day. So yeah.
I can imagine how that release must feel on the body because, like I think we know that often trauma is stored in the body, and you did mention it earlier. But now, how do you determine that TRE would best suit, a patient or a client? What do you look out for? What do you assess in order to determine if this could be a possible therapeutic tool?
Yeah. So great question. I think, as a clinical psychologist versus, because you do have TRE providers as well.
Yeah.
You do not have to be psychologists, whatever it might be.
Yes.
They do tend to be physiotherapists and people who work with, healing. But it's something that as a clinical psychologist, as I'm sitting with a client who has come for whatever particular reason, if trauma pops up, if that is something that they're coming or seeking help for, it's always something I'll consider. So I'll listen to the specific details, obviously, in terms of, is this person a good sort of candidate for TRE? I mean, essentially, if you have a nervous system, you're a good candidate for TRE. But I think it relies on quite a few things, to see the client's openness to the process, because I think it can sound like quite a departure, the idea of, okay, we're going to do these exercises, it's going to result in some kind of shaking feeling, to kind of see if people feel comfortable with that. And then also, just sort of where they are at in their trauma process. So if people are dissociated, or if they're flooded, or in freeze mode, just where they are, and kind of what we need to do. Do we need to do a little bit of therapy first? Bring it in and try it out and see. And then usually what ends up happening is, as the person has spent a good 4 to 6 sessions with me, or with a TRE provider, then they can go and sort of really try on their own and really own that process. Yeah.
So in terms of now, can one do TRE alone without having to go through therapy and talking about it?
Yes.
Or would you suggest that they, do both? What has been your observation or your view about that?
Yeah. I think that you can do it on your own. And I think that there is definitely a place for that, where for various reasons across the world, people might not always have access to therapy, to affordability of certain things. And this is an incredibly fantastic thing to be able to do, where you are self-empowered. You can do it in your home, wherever you are. You don't need any particular equipment or space. So it's in that way really, really practical.
Yes.
I think, again, depending on the case, I found a combination quite lovely, for people who enjoy the talk therapy as well.
Yes.
And often we will debrief and talk about the person's TRE process too, because what you'll often see is, in the way the person is, so we call it tremoring. That shaking, we refer to it as tremoring. You'll actually see very often that current day defense mechanisms we use. So if we tend to dissociate or get overwhelmed with things, it will come into the tremor. You'll actually kind of see it happening.
Yes.
And part of the work as a provider of TRE is to help the person stay associated to actually what is happening in their body, and help them make links to kind of, is this also what happens for you in current day in terms of how you're responding? It's such a beautiful thing to be able to link it to an actual sensation in the body, as well as a person then being able to reflect on how that plays out in their behavior, in their emotions, in the things that happen for them. So it would really depend on the person. I think there are, lastly, people that really do not want to talk, where their trauma is something they are not comfortable talking about for whatever particular reason. I find this a very empathic way then to still be able to regulate and work with the trauma without having to say or discuss anything. And through the trauma, the tremor process, you don't actually have to bear anything in mind. You don't have to be thinking about your particular issue at all. Some people say you can listen to music while you're doing it. The way I was trained, we prefer not to, because we want to try and stay associated with what's happening in the body, what sensations are coming up, if anything. And but that's another really lovely thing, is that your body is naturally releasing from an unconscious place. So you don't have to sort of control it too much. You can really just let your body do the work.
And that's very interesting, and a very interesting phenomenon that you're actually describing, because often I find in practice, people don't really want to talk about their trauma. They're just those that either they don't see the point or it's too painful.
Yeah.
And I think what I like about TRE, it gives people that option,
Yeah.
if they're not really ready to speak about it or they're not at that space, but at least they can do something with their body in order to help them, because a lot of them are storing so much pain, so much anger, so much frustration, from the different types of traumas that they've had to experience or go through, and
Absolutely.
the way it's still affecting them. But at least this process, I guess it gives them that option, to just deal with it in their own, their own way.
Absolutely.
And I heard you mention something about regulation earlier. I want to understand from you, what does self-regulation mean in TRE?
Okay, so self-regulation is an important part of the process. And this is why I always think, although you can straight off the bat go and do it on your own, why it's actually really helpful to start with a provider. Self-regulation essentially is a bit of a process where you realize you're going into a bit of overwhelm to start. So that could be you starting to feel flooded, dissociated, into freeze or fight or flight, and you actually detect that. So there's a bit of a self-awareness to this. You realize you're going into a bit of overwhelm, and it can look like in the TRE process, for example, a client might say their hands have suddenly gone freezing cold. And often that means they've got into a freeze response. So what we'll do there, because with TRE, we never push through the trauma.
Okay.
So we will slow it down at that point in time. And this is where the self-regulation comes in. It's lovely to learn it with someone who can observe you and say, look, I think you're going into a little overwhelm. Let's do a few, let's teach you some self-regulation. So what that is, when you're then on your own, independently, as you're aware that, okay, I think perhaps I'm feeling a little overwhelmed, or the tremoring feels quite strong, and I just want to slow it down, or stop for today kind of thing. You on your own then can, by doing a couple of things. So while you're actually tremoring, you can stop it at any time by straightening your legs, which I know sounds a bit funny without having the exercises, but the last exercise, you end up on your back on a yoga mat, and the tremoring comes in sort of in that position. You at any time, if you straighten your legs and sort of pull your toes up, it will stop. You can, if that still doesn't feel like it's enough, you can actually sit up, sip some water, walk around a little bit, breathing exercises. You can use any other tools you might have. Some people have done other techniques or modalities that really help them regulate. But essentially, it's helping you come back to a grounded, calmer place where you're coming out of that stress response back into feeling, okay, I'm back in my senses. Yes. I feel calm. I feel essentially grounded, back to earth, and I'm settled again. So we use self-regulation a lot, just to sort of temper the process as and when needed.
But it sounds that it can be, I don't know if I'll be using the right term, a bit more helpful, that there's somebody to guide you through that process.
Yes.
And you did mention that people can do TRE, without a practitioner or a therapist. But how do they get to know the tools? Is it through watching videos, or do they have to go for a few sessions before they can do it on your own? How does that process work if they can do TRE on their own?
Yeah. So what you'll find, there's a lot of resource online. In fact, one of the websites actually has the exercises. There's a video where they demonstrate that there's a series of 7 exercises. They demonstrate each one. They're done in a certain sequence, and they give you all the information that you should hold this for this long and do this many of those and breathe in this way and whatever it might be. So you can actually watch the video. But I think for me, what makes sense is, if you're going to try it alone, there are a couple of things to really consider first. Like with anything new, checking with your medical practitioners or your psychologists, or if you are on treatment or have any sort of medical conditions, psychological conditions, physical injuries, you're recovering from a surgery, anything like that, to be very careful about it, because you are obviously using your body, and although it's completely safe, we just want to make sure that we understand clearly why we're doing the exercise and what it is we're trying to achieve, so that we're not overstraining a part that really doesn't need to be worked, and we're doing it in a way where we're not harming our body. There are alternative exercises as well. So we work with all types of injury, physical as well, And there are certain spaces where an exercise is difficult to do.
Okay.
So then there are alternative exercises that are a bit more comfortable and get the same effect. So I think that's the first thing, just to make sure that as you head in, this is a therapeutic experience. And as you feel the sensation of tremoring, just to be prepared for what you're expecting, to be aware of your own expectations going in, and to watch as many of the videos. There's a lot. Dr. David Berselli, who is the father of TRE, there are a lot of videos. If you just put his name into a online search, you'll find a lot of fantastic content where he explains things so beautifully and clearly. And then the videos in terms of talking you through the exercises. So I would do a lot of research first.
Okay.
And then give it a whirl. And if you feel a bit unstuck, then to rather the TRE practitioners are fantastic, and to rather just maybe go do one or two at least to get an idea of how to move through.
Okay, lovely. And how does TRE make people feel better? How do you know that your patients start to feel better? Once you started the process or once you've completed the process with them.
Yeah.
And maybe also just, maybe share with us how many sessions do they require, or how do you determine how many sessions they require, before you realize that they are becoming better or experiencing some kind of release from, the traumas. If you can share that with us, please.
So I think that the way it's helping is essentially helping us regulate. So when there's trauma, we have that deep sort of muscle hold where emotions have literally been stored in certain muscles, parts of the nervous system. And through the process, we're helping release those. So that immediately starts to feel like relaxation, comfort, a return to sort of a safety feeling in the body. However, we will also, as the body goes and perhaps it's processing or working through a particular trauma, it is possible that a person might have an emotional response. So some people can do tremoring their whole lives and never feel an emotional sort of overwhelm or moment. Others, because we are working also on releasing deeper emotion, can actually feel sort of whatever the trauma was, even if it happened sort of 10 years ago, they might actually feel some of that same feeling they felt at that time. Now, it doesn't mean they're going back into that trauma. It just means that's being worked on and released. So they might feel like that for a little while, even after for a little while, but it will go. It's not come back. It's not that you're actually re-experiencing it. It's that it's releasing. So the relief that we feel, the relaxation that we feel, and the return to regulation. So for trauma, a lot of people walk around in fight, flight, or freeze all day long, and it is exhausting. We don't realize that we've tensed our muscles. We're constantly tight. There's constantly a panic happening. The stress hormones are constantly there. When you do this process, the opposite starts to happen. So what you'll often see is people will go through, and we really follow the person's process. Their body is telling us the story, and we're following what their tremor is telling us. So what you'll often find is people feel physically, even if they've had an injury to their shoulder, for example, that it starts to really improve. If they've had a surgery, it starts to kind of really help and speed up healing process. What you'll notice straight after a session very often is people just so relaxed. Before the session, you can see there's some intensity or tightness and stress, and you'll see this very kind of relaxed, for a lot of people feel a bit sort of sleepy and very calm and comfortable. Others feel quite, as I said earlier, energized and feel quite good, like they've actually released something they've been holding on to. So they're freeing up that energy really inside of themselves. You asked how many sessions. So with TRE, it's something you can do your whole life. Even once, even if it's used initially to really work through specific traumas, you'll find the tremor will shift and change in intensity. Sometimes there's a deep, hard sort of shaking. Sometimes it's a very mild sort of vibration. They're all important. It can move through the body and really even into myofascial unwinding. So you'll see there, you'll follow that process, but essentially once the person is kind of worked through that with you, and you can see, we understand the pattern of their tremoring, they understand what is happening, they can self-regulate, then they can go and do it every day for the rest of their lives if they want to, because it's a wonderful de-stress for anybody. So if you've just had a stressful day, if you're battling to sleep, there's so many applications. It's great for children as well. So it's a fantastic release for children with any anxiety. There's been links to helping with concentration, all the, assisting kids regulate as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I'm glad that it also is helpful for children, and I guess it must do a world of good, for them. Have you worked with kids?
I have. I work mostly with adults, but have worked with kids. So you can see with the children, it's a little bit different, where their tremor looks a little bit milder, and sort of we monitor sort of again how they're feeling. But again, very, very lovely to kind of see a switch where a child might come in very kind of sort of hyper aroused and hyper vigilant. And again, during the process, you see the shift where they're calm, they're settled. Some people become very quiet and peaceful. Others become very talkative and verbal. So you really just follow the process. And I think what's really lovely about it is that it's not something that the mind has to control. So in talk therapy or in many other modalities, you're really thinking something through. You're applying yourself, whereas this is unconscious to you. Your body, it's coming from your brain to your body and back again. It's doing the work intuitively and as a natural process, which is quite remarkable. You don't have to sort of really be engaging cognitively or emotionally to actually do the process.
So then what type of techniques then do you use, for the individuals that you see?
Techniques in terms of TRE?
Yes.
So in terms of, techniques. What we'll do is the 7 exercises are pretty standard. So you'll initially explain, make sure a person has a good understanding of what we're about to do, why we do each exercise, what we're trying to achieve. We've also spent a bit of time taking a little history, so we know, for example, if there is an ankle injury or whatever it might be, and we've worked on, how are we going to actually roll out these exercises. We then go through them, so we teach the 7 exercises, and then we go into the tremor at that point in time. Usually in a first session or 2, we won't do any intervention, so to speak. We will just see what is there, what the body does naturally, allow the person to get used to what is happening, and allow them as well to kind of stay associated with the sensations and feelings that are happening in their body. So as a provider, you will ask from time to time, are you noticing anything? How would you describe this feeling? And it helps the client sort of really check in that, most people will go, this is so weird. I didn't know my body could make this movement. And sort of then, whatever I'm feeling, usually quite comfortable. But we will bring in intervention. So there's soft interventions and then harder interventions, and they do require touch. So these are things that essentially, if a tremor loop becomes sort of stuck, where we see it's not really shifting, it's the same tremor, and we could move it along a little quicker. There are some very gentle hands-on techniques where we will literally sort of place hands very gently in certain areas that actually assist the tremor move through. And then if there is discomfort or spasm or anything, we can actually use little pillows, we use all kinds of sort of little balls that we've half deflated or rolled up hand towels, and you can sort of position these things and stick them around the body to alleviate any discomfort so that the tremor can continue. But again, we never sort of push through any pain. So if something's really uncomfortable, we slow it all down, and then we'll pick up again when the time is right.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that you don't necessarily push through, because as you were speaking, I guess examples that just came to my mind was, people who have gone through sexual traumas and sometimes don't even want to be touched. They're finding it very difficult to be touched by a spouse, or even loved ones, whether it's a hug or anything like that. And when you mentioned TRE, I just wondered, how would somebody, who's greatly affected by, such traumas, how would you, tailor the intervention, for them?
Absolutely. So it's got to be client specific, and I think this is where working with a provider is good, because you will always do sort of the intake and hear sort of what is there. We don't need to know the details of any sexual trauma or trauma that is uncomfortable to discuss, but we do need to know if there has been sexual trauma, because then the awareness for the provider, it's very important that we are observing and listening to the client, and that they feel in control of the process. It's very, very important. So you will discuss all these things, or I discuss all these things up front, that there's no surprises in the process. If the client does not want to ever be touched, that's okay. The the TRE will take care of itself. Eventually it will all get there. But you can also teach the client to do some of the interventions, which is really lovely. So you can tell the client where to place their own hands. They can use a cushion or whatever it might be. And that can also be a very empowering way of doing that. So obviously you're quite sensitive to those things, and really would talk through a person what they could experience, in relation to those things, and how we will then manage it. The clients are quite, good in this. They'll tell you what they're worrying about. They'll tell you what questions they have. And I think as long as there's no sense of rush or stress, there's ownership, they can control how this is going to go. That is a really, especially with trauma, a very important part, because as we know with trauma, usually it's situations where we don't have control. We're vulnerable and helpless in a situation where something is happening beyond our control or wish. And so this process is really important, that there is control. This is their process.
And it's good for them to know that and be given the opportunity to take control over that process, because often trauma makes us feel like we're not in control, like it's taken away our independence, our autonomy, our ability to be safe.
Absolutely.
But TRE creates that space where you can take control and you can decide how you want to move.
Absolutely. And I mean, another lovely application is that you can do it on your own, but you can do it in groups. You can do it with your family. You can, which can be lovely. Sometimes we do groups, and having a group of people tremor together can be a really lovely experience as well. It can be very healing, and sort of a sense of community, that we're not alone in what we're going through. But at the same time, we can do it on our own if that feels safer for us.
No, and that sounds lovely. I think sometimes a group experience is like a shared experience, which people do find very therapeutic.
Absolutely.
But Ryan, tell me, how is TRE different from yoga, meditation, and maybe other spiritual related interventions? How is it different?
So TRE is actually not aligned to any particular belief system.
Okay.
It's really seen as a somatic, physiological experience. It is something that is more biological in nature. It is something that naturally occurs in the body, and it's not aligned to any particular religion, culture, ideology, spirituality, nothing to that effect. So anyone can use it. If you have a nervous system, you can use it. I think as well, one of the differences where for, yoga or meditation, these are practices that do sometimes have, alignment with particular belief system, and often where you are engaging kind of a cognitive process to a certain degree, whereas this, as I said earlier, is kind of from the unconscious. You're not directing it from your cognitive brain. You're actually letting your body do what it needs to do. I'll often say to clients, you don't need to force anything. Try and trust your body, let go. It's going to actually take care of this process, which is quite lovely. And then, I mean, in terms of exercise, so we do refer to it as trauma release exercises, but it's not like a workout. The aim is not to get fit or cardiovascular or whatever. I mean, it aids, it can actually benefit athletic performance for sure, but the exercises are actually done more strategically in a certain order, and they are quite simple to do. Really, we work through from the bottom, moving upwards to activate our fight-flight response, but to kind of leave off in a safety message, so that the brain gets the message you can release your trauma without feeling traumatized.
So I guess I'm assuming that, I don't know if it's an assumption, But do you find sometimes that people get stuck in when you're doing these interventions? And when you find that your patient or your client is stuck, what is the next step? What do you do?
So it absolutely happens, like in any process. And I think that with the stuckness, it's almost to sort of expect that that's not an abnormal, it's going to possibly happen. So that is where we will often then bring in our soft interventions or harder touch interventions, or teach the client to use that. So for example, if a tremor, it always will originate essentially in the pelvis and upper legs. And as you go, it'll actually move up the spine, in through the neck. It can move right, through your whole body essentially. So if you find that a pattern is just repeating, usually over 2 or 3 sessions, it's the same pattern, you will actually start to bring in these interventions. So for example, you might place your hand sort of on the occipital ridge at the back, very, very gently, or place something that puts a little bit of pressure or resistance there. It works through the fascia in the body. So the fascia then will react and respond to that, and it actually can create a shift in how that processing of that trauma is. And you'll see the tremor actually there and then can move or change direction, or you suddenly will feel it in a different part of the body. So you actually can get it mobilized.
This TRE is sounding amazing. And I'm hoping that, Ryan, one of these days you would come and actually show us, our listeners and our viewers, how that actually looks like. If we can do a few interventions, trust me, I'll be your first online client.
Thank you. Yes, indeed.
But yeah, it's really been interesting to hear what TRE is all about, and I'm really hoping that people would really learn from what you've just shared. And maybe some of them would consider it, whether alongside therapy or even just as I guess a lifestyle change for themselves to include in their day-to-day habits. But what message would you like to leave for our viewers and our listeners, I guess, when it comes to trauma and including the work that you do with TRE? What's the take-home message that you want them to get from today?
I think, trauma can be and is most often life-changing. We can feel things we've never felt before. It can be completely overwhelming, and life can feel like it has changed from what was normal and comfortable to something now that we're completely out of our depth, and it's overwhelming. There are a lot of ideas and stigmas, I think, that we put on ourselves as well, that if I shouldn't be feeling this way, I should be able to cope, I should be strong, I shouldn't have to lean on people, or therapy is bad, or whatever it might be. And I think that in your own way, and whatever feels comfortable, is to try and work with the fact that it is normal. A trauma response is normal. If you have a nervous system, that is how it's going to be for every single one of us. And support is critical. So whatever does feel okay, make a start somewhere, whether it's seeking out a person you feel safe with, whether it's watching, or listening to podcasts or whatever it might be, that just help ease you into this, that there's a wonderful world of recovery and healing and journey that you can actually go on. And there's a huge community of people around the world where this is such a powerful, beautiful, celebrated thing. With the TRE as well, I would definitely say try it for sure. It's been a wonderful addition to my life it's beautiful. Have a look, research it. If it sounds like something that that would appeal, there's a lot of info out there. You literally can just type in TRE or kind of in South Africa, obviously TRE for Africa. There's a lovely website, but a lot of it will come up, and where you'll see all these videos that give more explanations. So yes, I would say try not to self-abandon. I think part of trauma is we self-abandon. And just really, even if it's hard to believe it, you do deserve to feel a bit better and be supported on whatever has happened. Yeah.
No, thank you so much for that, Ryan. And I'm just stuck on what you said. Try not to self-abandon. Sometimes we think that we're just moving on in this world, living a normal life, but we are abandoning parts of ourselves because of what we've experienced. We're sweeping certain things under the carpet, or we are suppressing feelings and emotions, but it is affecting us in one way or another, and it affects our relationships, our interactions. And working through your trauma, as you said, there's a world of recovery, and I think it's just important for people to locate that safe space.
Absolutely.
That space where they can recover and get the help that they need.
Absolutely.
And TRE is one of them.
For sure.
So I hope that some people will come call you.
Absolutely, lovely.
For the, just to work through their different traumatic experiences.
Yeah.
So this is one way that people can consider for those who maybe don't want to go through the talk therapy. And that's okay. So TRE is another option. And I'm glad that now our listeners and viewers get to know that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. I hope it's been helpful. And thank you for having me.